Kenji Matsumoto died in February. Heart attack. He was 61 years old. He'd been living in the Philippines for 5 years. There were a lot of people at the funeral. Neighbors, colleagues from his local office, people from the barangay. His Filipina partner, Leila, devastated, dressed in black, never leaving the casket. Then his sister Haruko flew in from Tokyo. She brought documents. She began settling the estate. She began asking questions. And that's when it came out that running parallel to Kenji for all 5 years, Leila had another family. In another city, 2 children, a man she called her partner. Kenji didn't know. Or did he? That question, and why the answer is more disturbing than it first appears, you'll understand by the end of this story. Stay until the final chapter. There's something there that could save you, and not just your money.
Kenji Matsumoto lived a correct life. Correct in the Japanese sense of the word. Good school, good university, major corporation. He worked there for 32 years. Married at 28, as expected. 2 children, a son and a daughter. A house in the suburbs of Osaka. His wife Yukiko died of cancer when Kenji was 55. They had been together 27 years. After her death, he worked 3 more years and retired. His children were grown and living their own lives. His son in Tokyo, his daughter married and living in Singapore. No grandchildren yet. Kenji was alone in a large house in the suburbs of Osaka. He wasn't an unhappy man. Japanese culture doesn't easily allow public unhappiness, so it's hard to say with precision. But he was lonely. That much was felt. At 58, he went to the Philippines for the first time. A business trip, a conference. He was there 4 days. He came back 2 months later, not for business.
Kenji wasn't the stereotype. That needs to be said directly, because stories about Japanese men in the Philippines often get reduced to one thing. Kenji was different. He fell in love with the country, the warm climate after Japanese winters, people who laughed loudly and didn't consider that impolite, the food, the smells, the colors, the sense that life here was something you enjoyed, not something you performed. On his second trip, he ended up in Davao, southern Mindanao, rented a small house, started learning Tagalog, got to know the neighbors. A month in, he met Leila. She was 38, divorced, or so she said. Worked at a small travel agency. Spoke English well. Better than Kenji, whose English was textbook correct, but clumsy in conversation. They talked slowly, with pauses, sometimes through a phone translator. Kenji later told his sister, in those pauses, we understood each other best. 6 months in, he decided to stay.
Leila Cruz, 38, Davao, middle child of 5 from a family in South Cotabato province. Father was a farmer. Mother died young. At 22, she married Fernando, a local driver, had 2 daughters. The marriage fell apart
which in the Philippines means they separated because there is no divorce. Fernando moved to Manila. Leila stayed in Davao with her daughters, raised them alone. Then she met another man, Arnel. He was from Cebu, a trader who came through Davao regularly on business. They got together. They had a son. Arnel didn't live in Davao full time. He visited once a month, sometimes less. Leila lived in Davao with 3 children. She worked. She kept the family going. Then Kenji appeared. And this wasn't a plan. Leila wasn't sitting somewhere thinking, I need to find a Japanese man with a pension. She was a tired 38-year-old woman who hadn't felt truly cared for in a very long time. And Kenji cared. Genuinely. Japanese precise. Without many words. He just did what needed doing. Paid for her daughter's schooling. Fixed things around the house that had been broken for years. Brought food when she was sick. There hadn't been anyone like that in her life for a long time.
They lived together for 5 years. Kenji officially arranged a long-term visa, the Special Resident Retirees Visa. Rented a good house in Davao. Leila moved in with the children. His sister Haruko flew out to visit once, the only time in 5 years. She later said, they looked like a family. Kenji was relaxed. He laughed. I hadn't seen him laugh like that since Yukiko died. Haruko noticed one thing. Kenji never talked about marrying Leila. No plans, no mention of it. She asked him once. He said, we're good the way things are. Haruko thought, he's Japanese, doesn't like talking about personal things. Nothing unusual. Kenji paid for everything. Rent, food, school, medical care, vacations. They went to the islands several times. When Leila needed money for something specific, he gave it without discussion. By year 5, he had spent around $100,000 on life with Leila and her family. He never counted. That number came later, from Haruko, going through bank statements. Arnel never disappeared. He came to Davao less frequently after Leila moved in with Kenji, but he came. The neighbors knew. Some of her relatives knew. A woman at the travel agency where Leila worked knew. Kenji didn't know. Or, a possibility we'll come back to, he didn't want to know. Leila managed the two worlds carefully. Arnel came through when Kenji was busy, or when Kenji flew to Japan to visit his children, roughly twice a year, 2 to 3 weeks each time. Her son with Arnel didn't live in Davao. He lived with relatives in the province. Kenji knew she had daughters from her first marriage. He didn't know about the son. Or he pretended not to know. These are different things, and we'll return to that. Kenji lived with Leila for 5 years. Believed it was love. Believed it was family. Maybe it was. And if it was a lie, maybe it took 2 people to build it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet,
Now's the time. We tell real stories here, every week. And we're just getting to the part that no one saw coming. On a Monday morning in February, Kenji didn't come down for breakfast. Leila found him in the bedroom, called for help. It was already too late. Heart attack in his sleep. The doctor said it was immediate. No pain. Leila called Haruko in Tokyo. Haruko flew in 2 days later. She later described arriving like this. Leila met me at the airport. She was crying. I could see that she was crying. For real. It wasn't performance. She had lost a person who had been beside her for 5 years. I had no doubt about her grief. Haruko had no doubt about the grief. She began to doubt other things when she started going through the estate and the documents.
Kenji had left no will. For a Japanese man of his age and culture, that was itself unusual. Japanese people are meticulous about paperwork. The absence of a will meant either a deliberate choice or something he'd been meaning to do and never got to. Haruko worked through the bank accounts. Kenji kept funds in a Japanese bank and in a local Philippine account. The local account was nearly empty. Money had gone out regularly to cover expenses. The Japanese account, savings, pension, accumulated assets, passed under Japanese law to his children, his son and daughter. Clear. The house in Davao was a rental. Fortunately not a purchase, since foreigners cannot own property in the Philippines. The lease ended in 3 months. Haruko told Leila she wouldn't be renewing it. Leila would need to find housing. It was an uncomfortable conversation. Then an elderly neighbor, the woman who lived on the other side of the fence, came to see Haruko. She said she had something important to tell her. And she told her about Arnel.
Haruko listened to the neighbor. Then she sat in silence for a long time. Then she called a lawyer in Tokyo. Then she went to Leila and asked directly. Leila didn't deny it, not right away, but when she understood that denial was pointless, she told the truth. Arnel, a parallel relationship running alongside Kenji for all 5 years. A child. Visits once a month or less when Kenji was in Japan. Haruko asked, "Did Kenji know?" Leila went quiet. Then said, "I don't know what he knew." That was an honest answer, or an evasive one, or both at once. Haruko spent several more days in Davao, spoke with other people, neighbors, Leila's colleagues. The picture assembled slowly. Some said Kenji definitely knew nothing. Others said he may have suspected, but stayed silent. One neighbor said it directly. He mentioned once that she had someone. I thought he meant a relative. Now I'm not sure. Did Kenji know? That's the question Haruko was never able to close. And honestly,
it doesn't have a clean answer. There are 3 possibilities. The first, he knew nothing. Leila managed it carefully. Kenji trusted her because he loved her, because he wanted to, because in Japanese culture, you don't ask uncomfortable personal questions directly. Possible. The second, he suspected, but chose not to know. Psychologists call this motivated ignorance. You don't ask the question because you're afraid of the answer. Things are good the way they are. Let them be. Also possible. And, honestly, very human. The third, the most uncomfortable. He knew and accepted it because Leila gave him what he needed. Warmth, presence, the feeling of a family. And what happened when he flew to Japan? He decided that wasn't his concern. Also possible. Haruko doesn't know. We don't know. But here's what's certain. For 5 years, Kenji lived with a woman who was never only his. And whether he was happy during those years is a question there is no one left to ask. Haruko went back to Tokyo, carrying her brother's ashes and a lot of unanswered questions. Legally, things were relatively clean. The house was a rental, not purchased. Japanese assets passed to the children. The money spent on Leila and her family was legally unrecoverable, voluntary expenses. No claims, no lawsuits. Haruko gave Leila money to cover 3 months of rent. She wasn't obligated to. She did it anyway. The children weren't to blame for any of it. A few months later, Haruko heard through mutual contacts. Leila had moved. Arnell was still in her life. Everything continued, as if Kenji had never been there. Haruko wrote a long letter to her sister-in-law, Kenji's daughter. In it, she tried to work out, was Kenji happy in those last 5 years? The answer she arrived at herself, carefully. Probably yes, in his own way, on his own terms, the ones he chose for himself. Maybe that's the only honest answer. Kenji's story isn't unique. That needs to be said plainly. Among Japanese, Korean, and Western men of older age who have lived or are living with Filipino partners, stories of parallel relationships come up often. Not because Filipino women are worse or less moral than others, but because several factors create the conditions for it. First, no divorce. A woman who has left her first husband is still officially married to him. This creates a state of legal and moral ambiguity. Technically, she's living with someone, not married to them. That makes subsequent relationships feel less official in her own mind and in the eyes of those around her. Second, the culture of silence. In the Philippines, direct confrontation is avoided. A difficult conversation is nakahiya, shameful. Better not to say it. Better to keep things separate. Better to smile. That's not unique to the Philippines, but it runs especially deep here.
Third, the economic gap. When a foreigner is supporting a woman's entire family, he becomes indispensable. But indispensable is not the same as loved. He can be irreplaceable as a source of stability, and at the same time, the woman may have emotional or physical connections with someone else. That's not an excuse, but it's an explanation. Fourth, age and what men are looking for. A man in his 50s or 60s who comes to the Philippines after losing a wife or ending a marriage, he's looking for warmth and presence, not necessarily passion, not necessarily exclusivity. Some of them, like Kenji perhaps, get exactly what they wanted and close their eyes to everything else, consciously or not.
Haruko agreed to share this story anonymously. She said, "I'm not telling this to judge Leila. I'm telling it because my brother spent 5 years with a woman who was never only his. And I still don't know whether he understood that. If he did understand, then he made a choice. I respect that. If he didn't, then he deserved to know the truth. That's not fair. But here's what I know for certain. In the last 5 years of his life, my brother wasn't alone. He laughed. He was needed. He felt like part of a family. Maybe for that, he paid a certain price. Maybe he knew the price. I don't know. But I want other men who find themselves in similar situations, to ask the right questions. Not so their hearts are protected. Hearts aren't protected by questions, but because they deserve to know what kind of relationship they're actually in.
Let's talk about what you need to understand. Number 1, a parallel relationship isn't always obvious deception. For a woman who is factually separated, but legally still married, who has children by different men, who lives in a culture where none of this is spoken about directly, the line between a relationship and living with several people can be genuinely blurred. Not an excuse, but context. Number 2, knowing means asking. Many men in Kenji's situation don't ask, not because they're naive, but because they're afraid of the answer, or because their culture doesn't encourage direct personal questions. Ask directly, uncomfortably, at risk. Is there someone else in your life? Are there children you haven't told me about? Is there a man you consider yours but haven't mentioned? Uncomfortable questions, but better to hear the truth now than never hear it at all. Number 3, no will is a catastrophe for your family. If you're living abroad with a partner outside of official marriage, write a will in your home country, clearly, who gets what. This protects everyone. Number 4, money sent without documentation is a gift. Legally, always. $100,000 over 5 years. No contracts, no receipts. Legally, voluntary expenses. No rights, no claims. You may think of it as an investment in a relationship. That's your choice. But legally, it's a gift. Number 5, sometimes happiness and truth don't coexist. Kenji may have been happy. Maybe he accepted the life he had. But the person beside him was never only his. And that changes the meaning of everything between them. Or it doesn't.
if he decided it that way himself? That's the hardest question in this story, and every person has to answer it for themselves.
Kenji Matsumoto died in February. He was happy, probably. In his own way, most likely. He spent 5 years with a woman who took care of him, who cried at his funeral, for real, who in her own way may have loved him, and who was never only his. This isn't a story about fraud. It's not a story about a villain. It's a story about how between two people, something real can exist. And at the same time, something the other person didn't know about. And about how the truth doesn't always make the past unreal. But it always changes how we understand it.
Haruko sometimes looks at photos of her brother from Davao. He genuinely looks happy. She doesn't know what to think. Maybe that's the only honest response. If this story made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. More stories like this one are coming.